Namaste, namaskaram, vanakkam, namo namaha, jai Ganesha. Please visit our website at classicalyoga.org, and there is a donate button if you would like to help us out. And please stand up for the Hindu, yoga, religious, spiritual, scientific, philosophical lifestyle. Today's podcast, Sukha versus Santosha. Short-term pleasure or lasting contentment. We, as a soul, more accurately for the Hindus, the Atmana, live in this miraculous body, mind, and emotion complex. Don't have to look very far for miracles. We're living in one, this body, mind, and emotions with all of its multitudinous activities that are going on simultaneously all of the time, of which we are little aware or not aware at all. Look at the chemicals that are going on inside of our brain all the time. Hopefully a balance of oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. These are all produced in the head, if you will, the pituitary and the pineal or the pineal gland. Now, when Hindus chant the Om, the Sanskrit Tamil Hindu word Om, A-U-Um or A-U-M in English, it's a very real vibration that starts in the belly, the Ah, or the animal nature, up into the heart, the Oo, the human nature, into the divine head, Ah-U-Um. Every time we chant this, we're going through a mini evolutionary cycle. In other words, animal, human, divine. This is the form of yours and mine. This is one of the reasons why the Hindu deity Ganesha is always primal for the Hindus. His very form represents the animal, human, and divine nature. And is it not interesting that these neurotransmitter hormones, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, are all produced in the head, whereas the adrenals and cortisol are produced in the kidneys, the animal part of our body. So let's go over these in a very general way, and then we're going to see how these are very natural occurrences for all of us and how we can also induce them through prescription drugs and through very unnatural ways. Now, basically, just living a good, healthy lifestyle will help to provide an overall homeostasis or balance of all of these hormones, of all of parts of our body, of course. Certainly an unhealthy, unethical lifestyle causes the system to go completely out of balance. In Hinduism, we seek for a sattvic or balanced life. Again, just living a general, healthy lifestyle, enough sleep, exercise, sunlight, good, healthy, wholesome food, and avoiding dangerous chemicals will all produce a wonderful balance of these neurotransmitter hormones and help to keep in balance the adrenaline and the cortisol. So it is the adrenaline and the cortisol that we really have to be very careful with, because when they're out of balance, this can cause serious, even life-threatening conditions. Of course, adrenaline and cortisol are the necessary hormones in times of stress to help us get out of dangers. But obviously, when they're overstimulated due to too much stress or too much external excitement or internal excitement through illicit drugs, if you will, really taxes the system. And this becomes what is often referred to as the devil's cocktail, when the adrenals and the cortisol levels are way out of balance, which again can be life-threatening. So it's wonderful that nature has provided us with adrenaline to help get us out of trouble in times of danger. But when we overstimulate the adrenaline, we become adrenaline junkies, if you will, extreme sports, for example, then obviously this does extreme detrimental damage to the body, mind, and emotions. Interestingly, when these hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, get out of whack, if you will, or out of balance, it actually attacks the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, and over time damages it. And the PFC is so important in our rational decision-making process. So let's focus on the divine hormones, if you will, of oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. And there's a lot of overlapping here as they work together. And obviously, again, we don't have to consciously think of these things. When we become more consciously conscious, we can adopt a certain lifestyle that provides a balance of these four hormones. But for the sake of simplicity, we can look at the oxytocin hormone as what is often called the cuddle hormone. Simply hugging a fellow human being or another animal produces oxytocin. This is the empathy hormone. Our serotonin is our satisfaction, gratitude hormone, simply manifested by saying thank you. The dopamine is the reward hormone, setting goals. It's one we have to be very careful with because this is the one that can be responsible for addictions, either somewhat healthy addictions or very negative, debilitating addictions. Endorphins, like all the other hormones, help to relieve pain. And laughter is one of the easiest ways to stimulate endorphins. Laughter is the best medicine. Often prescription medication is necessary when these levels either are too high or too low. For example, oxytocin is often used to help induce labor, and a certain prescription is given to help the birthing process. But there's also a negative way to increase the oxytocin: ecstasy, Molly. Serotonin, there's often a prescription for Prozac. However, there's the natural serotonin, which comes simply from sunlight and being grateful. Dopamine injections are often used for those suffering with Parkinson's disease or medications. But we also know the INEs that help increase the dopamine in all of us, which, when handled properly, can be beneficial, but obviously in a negative way can result in extreme addictions. All the enes, the caffeine, the amphetamines, the morphine. And of course, there are often prescriptions that stimulate the endorphin hormones when one is in serious pain, various opioids. But obviously this is abused in fentanyl and in a lesser way with alcohol and beer parties. The easiest way to stimulate the endorphins is simply laughter. Again, laughter is the best medicine. Now, one does not have to be a chemist or a physician to understand the complexity of these endorphins. In general, just living a good, healthy lifestyle, seeking harmonious relations with one's family, naturally produces oxytocin. With friends, serotonin. Dopamine is stimulated in a healthy way through setting goals, through business endeavors, through cultures. And remember, all cultures are developed by intense devotion, hence the word cult, to cuisines, for example, to language, to arts, to music. And we naturally stimulate our endorphins by having a sense of joy and bliss and happiness, laughter in our life. Now, it's not a coincidence that if we really seriously look at the various religions of the world, whether aware or not, their very formation is a healthy way of expressing or utilizing these natural neurotransmitters, these wonderful hormones inside of our head. Of course, as humans, again, we can abuse all of these hormones. But basically, when religions by their very nature, come together in community, this naturally stimulates the oxytocin. And there's a general trust one to the other, a great empathy. The service and the gratitude, the prayers within religions naturally stimulate the oxytocin and the serotonin. And there are various goals in religion, various projects that one undertakes, naturally stimulating dopamine. And again, as individuals come together, taking life seriously, but hopefully not too seriously, it helps to naturally stimulate a good, healthy endorphin boost. Now, in the Hindu yoga dharma, specifically, when we spoke of the family, friends, business, culture, and the bliss of the divine, these are actually considered the 5 Shaktis of the primal deity Ganesha. The very understanding of Hindu dharma stimulates oxytocin as we come together as a united Hindu family. Karma yoga, our Hindu ethics and selfless service, stimulate both the oxytocin and the serotonin. The intensity of the bhakti yoga and Raja yoga stimulates the dopamine. And then the bliss, the enlightenment, if you will, the inner sunlight, helps to develop the serotonin and the endorphins as one now takes again life seriously, but not too seriously. Sense of joy and bliss and laughter. An enlightened state of being as opposed to depressed and heavy and down. It's interesting that those who are anti-religious, the very militant anti-religious people, often suffer from various addictions in an unhealthy way, stimulating their dopamine and their endorphins. It's interesting that the late Christopher Hitchens, who was very brilliant, actually abused nicotine or dopamine and his endorphins with the consumption of alcohol to excess. And it's an interesting phenomena. If you listen to many of today's anti-religious people, though they may call themselves atheists, but remember the word theos refers to God, which is really a Christian term, so those who truly don't believe in the Christian God are atheists, but we're talking about those who are anti-religious. They often have a very foul mouth, stimulating their dopamine and endorphins through, I guess, what they think is a cool or hip way of speaking, using this very foul language, which becomes an addiction. Of course, there can be very unhealthy addictions within religion also. Remember, all these institutions are created by humans, and we humans are in this project together as we're trying to figure out our lives, trying to find a balance in life, and that means that we're off balance many times. We're all in this together. So let's focus on what needs to be a very important distinction between dopamine and serotonin, and especially the excessive use of dopamine. We all naturally seek pleasure in life, but when does it become extreme? So if we look at dopamine, if you will, is essentially the hormone that quote-unquote says to you, I want more. This is where addiction arises. Remember, there can be relatively healthy addictions, but obviously we all know there can be some very unhealthy at best or debilitating addictions. Serotonin is different, though. Serotonin has more to do with contentment. In other words, serotonin says, I have enough. Again, whereas dopamine says, I want more. So let's look at some clear indications of the difference between dopamine and serotonin. And remember, too, that a very natural way to increase one's serotonin is sunlight, and to be a grateful person, gratitude. Be willing to say thank you. Now, if you've listened to many of our podcasts, you know the importance of distinguishing between generalities and specifics. So we'll be using, obviously, English, which is our general language of communication, but since we are a Hindu organization, we'll also be using the specific language of Sanskrit, which is the ancient Arya or noble language of the Hindus, a religious language, the specific language of the Hindu yoga dharma. So, dopamine, remember, is the hormone that says, I want more, is typified by things that are short-lived. Druta, sukha, pleasure. Whereas serotonin produces the sense of santosha, contentment. Dirga, it's long-lasting. Again, dopamine is pleasure or sukha. Serotonin is contentment or santosha. So dopamine, pleasure, sukha is primarily felt in the body, mind, and emotions. Deha, mana, bhava, ha. Serotonin, contentment, santosha, is found in the atmana, our Hindu word for the inner essence or soul, if you will. Dopamine, pleasure, or sukha is found in the ahamkara, in the ego nature. Serotonin, contentment, santosha, is found in dharma, working together, shraddha, having full faith in yourself and those around you. Dopamine, pleasure, sukha is a primarily internal thing, all about one's self, sva. Whereas serotonin, contentment, santosha, is about others. That's the Varna system in Hinduism, recognizing the various individuals and their occupations are fellow human beings, those that are all around us, bahir. Dopamine, pleasure, sukha, is often about being greedy, lobha. Whereas serotonin, contentment, santosha, is about dana, or giving. Dopamine, pleasure, sukha often turns aggressive, extreme excitation, krodha. Whereas serotonin, contentment, santosha, is found in dhanyavad, thank you, karuna, compassion. Dopamine, pleasure, sukha is found in the extremes of lust for sex, power, money, fame, kama. Whereas serotonin, contentment, santosha, is found in damyata, control, yama, restraint. Interestingly, when we look at today's spurious yoga movement, with its 200-hour certified yoga teachers, clearly this is an abuse of dopamine. Or on the other hand, anything profound in life, especially when it comes to the religions of the world and the Hindu yoga dharma, takes decades and decades of study. Being content to pursue something for a lengthy period of time. This is serotonin. Dirghakala Nairantarya Satkara Savito. From the Yoga Sutras, adopt the true practice and practice for a long time. And that means decades of study. That's the serotonin, as opposed to the addictive quality of dopamine. Sadly, much of the incursions into India and by extension into the Hindu yoga dharma have been instituted by those who want things quick, the quick fixes, get rich quick schemes. All of the New Age things of pretending to be teachers of Ayurveda and chakras and kundalini without ever having undergone the lengthy period of instruction. Sadly, many Hindus have abandoned the dharma, if you will, or failed to understand it with much maturity. Today's technological age is sadly an age where everything comes so quickly and it leads to addictions. Clearly we see this when adults and, of course, adolescents get so easily addicted to technology and cell phones. bowing or kissing their own phones, as that becomes their new deity. Forgetting the dharma, karma, bhakti, raja, jnana, which naturally stimulates the oxytocin and the serotonin, the dopamine, and the endorphins. Respecting their teachers and the ashrams and mandirs and shastras and sadhana, which again naturally stimulates the oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. And the all-important Mahaganapati, whose very form and understanding brings us together as a united Hindu family, naturally stimulating the oxytocin, the bonding, the trust in one another. The serotonin is naturally developed by looking at his huge belly of Santosha, reminding us to seek contentment. And the dopamine is stimulated in a healthy way by being a foundation from which we are inspired to rise up and in. And as Brihaspati, the great laughing deity, Ganapati, stimulates us, our endorphins, in a very natural way. When we come together at the ashram for puja and satsang, we're naturally stimulating these hormones as we come together in the Hindu dharma, oxytocin. We always start off with appreciating our inner compass, our GPS, meaning here gratitude, thankfulness. There's the serotonin. Persistence and sacrifice, naturally stimulating the dopamine as we have a goal in mind. And then we begin by chanting to Mahaganapati, the great laughing deity, naturally stimulating these wonderful hormones. And of course, all of this helps to alleviate unnecessary stress. Remember, that's the Asura cocktail, if you will. When our adrenal glands are overstimulated and the cortisol is way out of balance, it's actually doing serious damage to the mind itself. So, here's something that we simply do to bring home this understanding of the lives that we are leading, where we want to have just enough stress, not too much, not too little. It's very common to give a mala to students, either around one's neck or around one's wrist. So here's something simply profound. Put a rubber band on your wrist and look at the rubber band. In its natural state, does it not make the shape of the ellipsoid, the Shiva Lingam, the zero, if you will, which was invented by the Hindus? The mystical zero that in form only exists because of the nothingness. So you take that rubber band, and like a string on a guitar or a sitar or violin, if you will, when the string is flaccid, if you will, you really don't get any sound out of it. That's its totally relaxed state. However, if you want to play the music of life, you have to put a little stress on the string, and then you can play the tune, the music of life. However, if we continue to pull on that string, in other words, overstress it, what happens? It snaps. So if you find yourself on the brink of snapping, if you will, take that rubber band on your wrist and snap it. Bring yourself back to reality. Back to Ganesha, the understanding of contentment, Santosha, stimulating your serotonin and avoiding the unhealthy dopamine, the unhealthy levels of adrenaline and cortisol. In the simple remedy given by the Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali in his classic Yoga Sutras, which remember one of the 6 orthodox systems of Hindu philosophy, and, by the way, have nothing to do with any specific asana. Remember, Hatha Yoga was never meant to be on display. The sacred words of Patanjali in his classic Yoga Sutras, Maitri Karuna Mudita, be friendly, Be compassionate, be happy, naturally stimulating all of these neurotransmitters, the oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. Be friendly, be compassionate, and you will be happy. Maitri karuna mudita. Be unfriendly, lack compassion. We won't be happy, and those around us won't be happy either. So we all need to maturely ask ourselves, do we want short-term pleasure? Or do we want lasting contentment? Like Ganesha's big belly, Lambodharaya Namaha. Jai Ganesha, Jai Hindu Yoga Dharma. So if you're thankful for and have received any benefit or reward from our many, many podcasts on the Hindu Yoga Dharma specifically and religion spirituality in general, which is increasing the serotonin and the dopamine, please consider giving generously at classicalyoga.org, thus stimulating the oxytocin. And hopefully the podcasts have made you feel good, taking life seriously, but not too seriously, thus stimulating our endorphins. And certainly it is a great pleasure for all of us to provide this material for you. And certainly if you have any questions over our content, please feel free to contact us. So have a wonderful day, and to all the Hindus out there, Jai Ganesha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.